Chapter 1. Everybody has told me that I must write this story, and it is true that I was mixed up in the affair from the very beginning. Naturally, there are gaps in my knowledge, but they can be filled by Sir Eustace Pedler's diary, which he has kindly asked me to use. So, here goes. Anne Bedingfeld begins her adventures. I have always wanted to have adventures. You see, my father, Professor Bedingfeld, was one of England's greatest experts on primitive man. His mind lived in Paleolithic times, but the problem was that his body lived in the modern world. Papa did not care for modern man. Unfortunately, it is difficult to manage without modern men, such as butchers and bakers and greengrocers. Therefore, as Papa spent most of his time thinking about the past, and Mamma had died when I was a baby, I had to deal with the practical side of life. Papa enthusiastically ate what was put before him, but seemed troubled when the question of paying for it came up, and we never seemed to have any money. Papa was famous in the scientific world, and had many letters after his name, but this was not the type of fame that brought in cash. There were times when I envied Emily, our servant girl. Emily's boyfriends included a large sailor and several boys who worked in the local shops. She said she wanted to practice with different young men, and I thought sadly that I had no one to practice with. All Papa's friends were elderly professors with long beards. What I wanted was adventure, love and romance, and what I had was dullness and boredom. There was a library in the village. I enjoyed reading the adventures and love affairs in these books, and I went to sleep dreaming of strong, silent men who always knocked down their opponent with a single punch. There was the cinema, too, with a weekly film, The Perils of Pamela. Pamela was a marvellous young woman. Nothing worried her. She fell out of aeroplanes, adventured in submarines, and climbed skyscrapers without a moment's fear. She was not really clever. The master criminal caught her each time, but the hero always rescued her at the beginning of the following week. I used to come out full of a desire for adventure. Most people have never heard of the ancient bones that were found at the Broken Hill mine in Rhodesia, and yet, one morning, I found Papa full of excitement.
"Do you understand, Anne? I have always said that the beginning of the human race was in Africa. They travelled—"
"Don't put marmalade on kippers, Papa," I said quickly, stopping my parents' absent-minded hand. "Yes, you were saying?"
"They travelled to Europe on—"
Here he choked badly on a mouthful of kipper bones.
"We must go to Rhodesia at once," he said at last, standing up. "There will be so many discoveries. The primitive ox, I think, but not the woolly rhinoceros. You will write to the travel agent today."
"What about money, Papa?" He looked at me in a disappointed way.
"Your point of view always depresses me, my child. We must not let money stand in the way of scientific progress."
I think the travel agent might require money, Papa.
Papa looked upset. My dear Anne, you will pay them in cash.
I haven't got any cash.
Papa looked thoroughly irritated. My child, I really cannot be bothered with these silly details. The bank, I had something yesterday saying I had £27.
That's your overdraft, I believe.
Then you must write to my publishers.
I agreed, although I was not confident. Papa's books bring in more fame than money, though I loved the idea of going to Rhodesia. Wait, Papa! You have different boots on, I called out. Take off the brown one and put on the other black one. And don't forget your scarf, Papa. It's a very cold day. Papa left, correctly booted and warmly dressed. He returned late that evening, and I was concerned to see that his scarf and overcoat were missing.
Dear me, Anne, you are right. I took them off to go into the cave. One gets so dirty there.
Our main reason for coming to live in Little Hampsley had been the Hampsley Cave. Papa spent most of his days working underground, digging out the bones of prehistoric animals. Papa coughed badly all evening, and the following morning I sent for the doctor. Poor Papa. It was pneumonia. He died 4 days later. Chapter 2. Everyone was very kind to me, but it took me some time to realize that the thing I had always wanted, freedom, was mine at last. I was very poor, but free. At the same time, I realized the kindness of all these people. The vicar did his best to persuade me that his wife needed someone to help her at home. Our tiny library decided to have an assistant librarian. Finally, the doctor suggested I should marry him. I was astonished. The doctor was almost 40, a round, fat little man. "It's extremely kind of you," I said, "but I could never marry a man unless I loved him completely." He sighed.
But, my dear child, what will you do?
"Have adventures and see the world," I replied. "I'm going to London. If things happen anywhere, they'll happen in London. I will look out for exciting opportunities, and you'll hear of me next in China or Timbuktu." My next visitor was Mr. Fleming, Papa's London lawyer. He took my hands and spoke to me kindly.
My poor child, your father was a very great man, but he was not good at business.
I knew that better than Mr. Fleming, but I had to listen politely while he told me that my father had only left me £87.
Well, well, my dear, we must see what can be done.
He hesitated, and then said, "Would you like to come to stay with us for a time? London, the place for things to happen." "It's very kind of you," I said. "While I'm looking for work, I must earn my living, you know."
Yes, yes, my dear child. That is agreed, then. My wife will be delighted to welcome you.
I wonder if husbands know as much about their wives as they think they do. I was a little nervous of meeting Mrs. Fleming. Mr. Fleming was nervous too, I realized, as we went up the stairs of the tall house in a quiet Kensington Square. Mrs. Fleming greeted me pleasantly enough. A large, quiet woman, she took me up to a lovely bedroom, told me that tea would be ready in a quarter of an hour, and left me. I heard her voice raised as she entered the drawing-room below.
"Well, Henry, why on earth—"
I could not hear the rest, but a few minutes later her voice was raised again, and she was much more annoyed.
"I agree. She is very good-looking."
It is really a very hard life. Men will not be nice to you if you are not good-looking, and women will not be nice to you if you are. Chapter 3. In the following weeks, I did not make much progress at all. I had not found a job, not that I really wanted one. I had the belief that if I went looking for adventure, adventure would meet me halfway. It is a theory of mine that was about to be proved true. It was early in January, the 8th. I was returning from an interview, and at Hyde Park Corner tube station, I bought a ticket to Gloucester Road. There were not many people on the platform, but if there is one smell I cannot bear, it is mothballs. One man's overcoat stank of mothballs, and yet most men begin to wear their winter overcoats before January, and so the smell should have gone. The man seemed absorbed in his own thoughts. He was small, thin, and had a very suntanned face. He has just come from abroad, I decided. That's why his overcoat smells so. At this moment, the man turned. He glanced at me and then looked at something behind me, and his face showed sudden panic. He took a step backwards, as though running from danger, forgetting that he was standing on the edge of the platform. He went down. There was a bright flash from the rails and a loud bang. I screamed. People came running. Two men in railway uniforms seemed to appear from nowhere to take control. Part of me was horrified at the sudden disaster. Another part was fascinated by the methods used for lifting the man off the electric rail and back onto the platform.
"Let me pass, please. I'm a medical man."
A tall, broad-shouldered man, wearing a dark overcoat and a formal hat, pressed past me. He had a brown beard and eyeglasses with gold frames. As he examined the body, I had a strange feeling that what was happening was not real. Finally, the doctor stood upright and shook his head.
"Dead. Nothing to be done."
A worried porter raised his voice.
"Now then, stand back, will you?"
I suddenly felt sick. I turned and walked towards the lift. I had to get out into the open air. The doctor was ahead of me. The lift was about to go up, and he began to run. As he did so, he dropped a piece of paper. I picked it up and ran after him, but the lift gates shut in my face. I hoped it was nothing important he had lost. Written on the notepaper was 17-1-22 Kilmorden Castle. There was an unpleasant smell. Mothballs again. The paper smelt strongly of them. I walked home slowly and did a good deal of thinking about how the doctor had examined the body. There was a brief article in the evening papers which said that a man had been killed in the tube. Nothing had been found in the dead man's pockets except instructions from a house agent to view a house on the river near Marlow. It was in the name of L.B. Carton, Russell Hotel. There was uncertainty whether the cause of death was suicide or accident. That seemed to make my duty clear, and Mr. Fleming agreed.
You should attend the inquest.
At the inquest, the hotel clerk identified the man as L.B. Carton of Kimberley, South Africa. He had arrived the day before and had, it seemed, come straight from the ship. I was the only person who had seen the death.
You think it was an accident?
The coroner asked me. I am sure of it. Something alarmed him, and he stepped backwards without looking or thinking.
But what could have frightened him?
I don't know, but he looked extremely shocked. The jury, obviously impatient to get home, decided that the event was an accident.
It is extraordinary to me, said the coroner, that the doctor who first examined the body has not come forward.
I had my own theory about the doctor, and intended to visit Scotland Yard, the police headquarters. But the next morning brought a surprise in the Daily Budget newspaper. Extraordinary development in tube accident. Woman found strangled in lonely house. I read with interest. A terrible discovery was made yesterday at the Mill House, Marlow. The body of a beautiful young woman was discovered strangled in an upstairs room of the house. She is thought to be a foreigner, but so far has not been identified. The property, which is owned by Sir Eustace Pedler, is empty and advertised for rent. The house agent's instruction to view the Mill House was the only item found in the pockets of the man who died at Hyde Park Corner tube station. Sir Eustace Pedler is spending winter on the French Riviera. Chapter 4. The inquest on the strangled woman revealed the following facts. At 1 o'clock on January the 8th, a well-dressed woman with a foreign accent had entered the offices of Butler and Park house agents in Knightsbridge. She wanted to rent a house by the River Thames. She gave the name of Mrs. de Castina and her address at the Ritz Hotel, but there was no one of that name staying there. Mrs. James, who is employed to look after the Mill House, explained that at 3 o'clock a lady came to see the house. She produced instructions from the house agents, and Mrs. James gave her the keys. A few minutes later, a young man arrived. Mrs. James described him as tall and broad-shouldered, with a sun-tanned face, light grey eyes, and clean-shaven, with no moustache or beard. He was wearing a brown suit. He explained that he was a friend of the lady, but had gone to the post office to send a telegram. Mrs. James directed him to the house. 5 minutes later, he reappeared, handed back the keys, and explained that the house was not right for them. Mrs. James did not see the lady again. However, she noticed that the young man seemed very upset. He looked like a man who had seen a ghost, she said. The following day, another lady and gentleman came to see the property and discovered the body of Mrs. de Castina, strangled with a thin black rope. The police surgeon believed the woman had been dead about 24 hours. A verdict of murder was given, and the police and the Daily Budget were left to look for the man in the brown suit who had murdered Mrs. de Castina. These details were published by the Daily Budget, and every day the newspaper demanded, "Find the man in the brown suit." The accident in the tube, however, was now seen as a coincidence and forgotten. But I thought there was a connection between the two deaths. In each there was a man with a sun-tanned face, clearly an Englishman who had been living abroad, but I knew he wasn't a doctor. I had felt at the time that there was something wrong with the doctor's examination. I had worked in hospitals during the war and seen the professional way doctors dealt with bodies. A doctor does not feel for the heart on the right side of the body, but this doctor would have been able to take anything he wanted from the pockets of the dead man. I had to go to Scotland Yard to see whoever was in charge of the Mill House murder. When I arrived, I was introduced to Detective Inspector Meadows, a small man with red hair and a very irritating way of speaking.
"Good morning. I understand you think you may be of use to us."
His voice suggested that such a thing was unlikely. I began to get angry. "You know about the man who was killed in the tube? The man who had an instruction to view the mill house at Marlow?"
"Ah," said the inspector, "you are the Miss Bedingfeld who gave evidence at the inquest. Certainly, the man had instructions in his pocket. A lot of other people may have had too,"
I continued. "You didn't think it was unusual that this man had no ticket?"
"Easiest thing to drop your ticket. I've done it myself," Meadows claimed.
"And no money?"
"Some men don't carry a wallet," he replied.
I tried again. "You don't think it's unusual that the doctor never came forward afterwards?"
"A busy medical man often doesn't read the papers. He probably forgot all about the accident."
"In fact, Inspector, you are determined to find nothing unusual," I answered.
"Well, I think you are too fond of the word, Miss Bedingfeld. Young ladies are romantic, I know, fond of mysteries and that kind of thing, but I'm a busy man."
I decided the inspector was useless. Chapter 5. I walked straight to the house of Lord Naseby, who is the millionaire owner of the Daily Budget. While staying with Mr. and Mrs. Fleming, I had been able to get a calling card bearing the name of Lord Loamsley, a friend of theirs. I now wrote a note on this. "Please give Miss Bedingfeld a few moments of your time." It worked. A servant took the card away, and soon a secretary appeared and asked me to follow him. As I entered a large room, a frightened-looking typist ran past me. Then I was face to face with Lord Naseby, a big man, big head, big moustache, big stomach. But I had not come here to comment on Lord Naseby's stomach. He was already shouting at me.
"Well, what does Loamsley want?"
To begin with, I said, I don't know Lord Loamsley. I took his card from the house of the people I'm staying with, and I wrote those words on it myself. It was important that I should see you. For a moment, I thought Lord Naseby might explode with anger, but he calmed himself.
I admire your coolness. Well, you see me. If you interest me, you will continue to see me for exactly 2 minutes longer.
That will be long enough, I replied. It's the Mill House mystery. I stated the facts of the tube accident and my conclusions. When I had finished, he said unexpectedly,
Well, you seem to be a very clever young woman, but it's not enough evidence.
I'm aware of that. I want a job on your newspaper to investigate.
Can't do that. We've got our own special man on it.
And I've got my own special knowledge, Lord Naseby.
Oh, have you? Well, what is it?
This doctor dropped a piece of paper. It smelt of mothballs. So did the dead man. But the doctor didn't. The doctor must have taken it from the body. It had 2 words on it, and some numbers.
Let's see it.
Lord Naseby stretched out his hand casually. I think not, I said, smiling.
You are a bright girl, sensible to hang on to it. You were not worried about handing it to the police?
I went to Scotland Yard to hand it in this morning, but the inspector annoyed me.
Foolish man. Well, my dear girl, if you get anything that can be published, you will have your chance.
Chapter 6. I went home delighted. Once in my room, I studied my precious piece of paper. Here was the clue to the mystery. To begin with, what did the figures represent? There were 5 of them, and a dot after the first 2. 1, 7, dot, 1, 2, 2. That did not seem to lead to anything. I studied the words, Kilmorden Castle. I had to get to Kilmorden Castle as quickly as possible. I left my room and returned with a pile of reference books from the Flemings' library. I searched with growing annoyance. Finally, I shut the last book with a bang. I could find no such place as Kilmorden Castle. Why should anyone invent a name like that? It was very strange. I sat back miserably and wondered what else I could do. Then I jumped up. Of course, I must visit the scene of the crime. I must go to Marlow. I would visit the house and pretend that I wanted to rent it. The Mill House had its own lodge, a small house standing guard at its gates. In answer to my knock, the door of the lodge opened quickly, and a tall, middle-aged woman rushed out. "Nobody can go into the house, do you hear? I'm sick of you reporters. Sir Eustace's orders are—" I understood the house was available to rent, I said coldly. Of course, if it's already taken— Oh, I beg your pardon, miss. I've been so bothered by newspaper people. No, the house isn't rented, nor likely to be now. Has there been a fire? I asked in an anxious whisper.
"Oh, Lord, nothing like that, miss. But surely you've heard about that foreign lady who was murdered here?"
"I did read something about it in the papers," I said carelessly, which brought a fierce reaction.
"I'm sure you did, miss. It's been in all the newspapers. The Daily Budget wants to catch the man who did it. Well, I hope they get him. Although a nice-looking man he was.
He looked like a soldier."
"Ah, well, perhaps she treated him badly, though she was a very good-looking woman."
"Did she seem upset at all?" I asked.
"Not a bit. She was smiling to herself, and then she was murdered. I shall never forget it. Why, I wouldn't even stay here if Sir Eustace hadn't begged me."
"I thought Sir Eustace Pedler was at the French Riviera."
"So he was, miss. He came back to England when he heard the news, and his secretary, Mr. Paget, offered me double pay to stay on. That young man now," said Mrs. James, returning suddenly to an earlier point in the conversation, "he was a bit excited. His eyes, I noticed them especially, were all shining. But I never thought of anything being wrong, not even when he came out again looking so upset."
"He was upset. How long was he in the house?"
"Oh, not long. 5 minutes, maybe."
"How tall was he, do you think? About 6 foot?"
"I should say so."
"He was clean-shaven, you say?"
"Yes, miss."
"Was his chin at all shiny?" I asked suddenly. Mrs. James was astonished.
"Well, miss, it was."
"However did you know?" "It's a strange thing, but murderers often have shiny chins," I explained wildly, but Mrs. James did not doubt me.
"Really now, miss, I never heard that before. I'll fetch you the keys."
I accepted them and went on to the mill house. From the beginning, I had realized that the differences between the man Mrs. James had described and my tube doctor were not important. An overcoat, a beard, eyeglasses with gold frames. The doctor had appeared middle-aged, but he had bent over the body like a young man. I believed that the mothball man and Mrs. de Castina intended to meet at the mill house, and I was sure that when the mothball man suddenly saw the doctor, it was totally unexpected and alarming to him. What had happened next? The doctor had quickly removed his disguise and followed the woman to Marlow, but in his hurry to remove the false beard, he had left glue on his chin. This explained my question to Mrs. James. Chapter 7. I found the room where the murder had happened. It was square, with 2 big windows, plain white walls, and a bare floor. There was nothing in it. At each window there was a window seat with a cupboard under it. The first was empty, but when I put my hand into the opposite cupboard, I found a roll of Kodak film. I smelled it suspiciously. Mothballs again. The film had been carried in the pocket of the man who was killed in the tube. The doctor had taken the film, and he had dropped it here. I had a clue. On the way back to town, I studied the paper again. Suddenly, the numbers took on a new meaning. Could they be a date? 17/1/22. The 17th of January, 1922. But in that case, I must find Kilmorden Castle, because today was the 14th. I took my precious roll to the big Kodak shop on Regent Street and asked for prints.
"You've given me the wrong roll," the man said, smiling. "This is an unused film." I walked out with as much pride as I could. I expect it is good for me now and again to realize what an idiot I can be, but nobody enjoys it. And then, as I was passing one of the big shipping offices, I stopped. In the window was a beautiful model of one of the company's boats, and it was labelled Kenilworth Castle. A wild idea ran through my brain. I went in and asked with a shaking voice, "Kilmorden Castle?" "On the 17th from Southampton. Cape Town? First or second class?"
"How much is it?"
"First class, £87.
I interrupted him. This was exactly the amount of money left to me by Papa. "First class," I said. Chapter 8. Extracts from the Diary of Sir Eustace Pedler, MP.
It is an extraordinary thing that I never seem to get any peace. I am a man who likes a quiet life. I like England in the summer and the Riviera in the winter. My desire in life is to be thoroughly comfortable. But despite myself, I become involved. I hate being involved. All this because Guy Paget came into my bedroom this morning with a telegram, looking extremely upset. Guy Paget is my secretary, a hard-working, admirable man. No one annoys me more. For a long time I have been wondering how to get rid of him. But you cannot dismiss a secretary because he prefers work to play, likes getting up early in the morning, and has no bad habits. I wouldn't mind if Paget didn't make me work too. The only amusing thing about the fellow is his face. He has the face of a 14th century poisoner, the sort of man a king might send out to murder his enemies. Last week, I had the brilliant idea of sending him to Florence. He had talked about Florence and how much he wanted to go there. "My dear fellow," I cried, "you will go tomorrow. I will pay all your expenses." It seemed a small price to pay for a week of freedom. It has been a wonderful week. But when I opened my eyes and saw Paget standing between me and the light at the terrible hour of 9 this morning, I realized that freedom was over. "My dear fellow," I said, "has the funeral already taken place?" Paget does not approve of humour. "So you know, Sir Eustace." "Know what?" I said crossly. "From your expression, I thought one of your relatives must have died." Paget held up the telegram. It's a telegram from the police at Marlow. A woman has been murdered in your house." "How rude!" I exclaimed. "Why in my house? Who murdered her?" "They don't say. I suppose we will go back to England at once, Sir Eustace." It is incredible that anyone who can get away from England in winter does not do so. It is a horrible climate. Several very surprising things have occurred. To begin with, I met Augustus Milray, who is a perfect example of the kind of fool produced by the present government. He took me into a quiet corner, speaking in a way that suggested dark, important secrets. He talked for a long time about South Africa and the industrial situation there, about rumours of unrest and trouble so bad that the workers in the diamond mines might dare to lay down their tools and stop work. Finally, his voice a whisper, he explained that documents had been found which must be placed in the hands of General Smuts, the Prime Minister of South Africa. "Drop them in the nearest letterbox, then," I said cheerfully. He seemed shocked. "My dear Pedler, this is a time for great care." He shook his head. "Is it true that you intend to visit South Africa soon? You have substantial businesses in Rhodesia, I know." "Well, I had thought of going in about a month." "Could you possibly make it sooner? You would be doing the government a very great service." "Well," I said slowly, "I am anxious to leave England again." "I am very grateful to you, Pedler. I will send the package to you, to be placed in General Smuts' own hands, you understand. The Kilmorden Castle sails on Saturday." It was the following evening that Jarvis, my butler, informed me that a gentleman wished to see me. "The gentleman asked me to tell you that he comes from Mr. Milray." My visitor was a well-built young fellow with a suntan and a scar from the corner of his eye to the jaw. "Sir Eustace, Mr. Milray wishes me to go with you to South Africa as a second secretary." He was a young man who would not take no for an answer. "You will say nothing to anyone about this." "Very well," I said weakly. I was getting into trouble, just when I thought I was at peace. "And what is my new secretary's name?" I asked. He thought for a minute. "Harry Rayburn seems suitable," he said.
Chapter 9. Anne's Story. It is not dignified to be seasick. I am sorry to say that as soon as the Kilmorden began to move up and down on the sea, I turned pale and went downstairs to my cabin. I remained there for 3 days, feeling ill. I was a totally different Anne to the one who had rushed back with great excitement from the shipping office a few days earlier. Mrs. Fleming had spoken to me as soon as I entered the drawing-room. "Anne, my dear, Miss Emery is leaving me." Miss Emery was the children's tutor. "It would be so nice if you took her place." I was so pleased. I knew she didn't want me, It was kindness that made her offer. I put my arms around her. "You are very kind," I said. "Thank you, but I'm going to South Africa on Saturday." As I left that morning, she gave me an envelope. Inside, I found 5 new £5 notes and the words, "I hope you will not be offended and will accept this with my love." She was a very good, kind woman. So, here I was, with £25 in my pocket, chasing my adventure. But it was only on the 4th day that the stewardess finally persuaded me to go up on deck. Wrapped in blankets and feeling weak and tired, I was helped up and put in a deck chair. People passed me, couples exercising, children running, young people laughing. A few other people, suffering like me, lay pale-faced in deck chairs. The air was cold and fresh, and the sun was shining brightly. I felt a little happier. I began to watch the people. One woman in particular attracted me. She was about 30, of medium height and very fair, with a round, happy face and blue eyes. In a pleasant but confident way, she seemed to own the ship. Deck stewards ran about obeying her commands. She appeared to be one of those rare people who know what they want, make sure that they get it, and manage to do so without being offensive. I decided that if I ever recovered, it would amuse me to talk to her. We reached Madeira about midday, and the local people came on board to see what they could sell to the passengers. I picked up a large bunch of flowers and smelt it. I felt much better after that. When my stewardess brought chicken soup, I enjoyed eating it. The attractive woman I had seen earlier had been off to look around the town. She came back accompanied by a tall, soldierly-looking man with dark hair and a suntanned face. I had noticed him earlier in the day. A strong, silent man, I thought. He was about 40, with slightly greying hair, and was easily the best-looking man on board. I asked my stewardess if she knew who the attractive woman was. "That's Mrs. Blair. You must have read about her in the papers." I nodded. Mrs. Blair was very well known as one of the most fashionable women of the day. The following morning, to my surprise, after walking a few times round the deck with her companion, Mrs. Blair stopped by my chair. "Feeling better this morning?" I thanked her and said I felt slightly more like a human being. "You did look ill yesterday. Colonel Race and I decided that we would have the excitement of a funeral at sea, but you've disappointed us." I laughed. "Being in the air has done me good."
"Nothing like fresh air," said Colonel Race, smiling.
"Being shut in those hot cabins would kill anyone," declared Mrs. Blair. Sitting by my side, she dismissed her friend with a nod. "You've got an outside cabin with a sea view, I hope?" I shook my head. "My dear girl, why don't you change? There's plenty of room. A lot of people left the ship at Madeira. Talk to the ship's purser about it at lunchtime. He's responsible for that kind of thing." At the thought of lunch, I shuddered. I couldn't move. "Don't be silly. Come and walk with me." I felt very weak on my legs at first, but as we walked, I began to feel brighter and better. Colonel Race joined us again.
"You can see the mountain of Tenerife from the other side of the deck," he told us.
"Can I get a photograph of it, do you think?" asked Mrs. Blair.
"No, but that won't stop you trying."
Mrs. Blair laughed. We went round to the other side of the deck. There, white and snowy in a rose-coloured mist, was the beautiful mountain peak. Mrs. Blair ran for her camera and began energetically taking photographs. "There, that's the film finished, but I've got another." She produced it in triumph from her bag. A sudden roll of the boat upset her balance, and as she reached for the rail, the film went over the side. "Oh!" cried Mrs. Blair, laughing. She leaned over. "Do you think it has gone overboard?"
"No," said Colonel Race, "but you may have hit an unlucky steward on the deck below."
The bell for lunch was rung. "Lunch, Miss Bedingfeld," declared Mrs. Blair. "Well," I said, "I do feel rather hungry." "Splendid. You're sitting at the purser's table. Ask him about the cabin." I began with a little food and finished by eating an enormous meal. The purser congratulated me on my recovery. Everyone was changing cabins today, he told me, and promised that my things would be moved without delay. There were only 4 at our table: myself, a couple of elderly ladies, and a person working in Christian churches abroad, the Reverend Edward Chichester. I looked round at the other tables. Mrs. Blair was sitting at the captain's table, Colonel Race next to her. On the other side of the captain was a successful-looking grey-haired man, and there was a man I had not seen before. He was tall and dark, and looked so cruel that I was startled. I asked the purser who he was.
"Oh, that's one of Sir Eustace Pedler's secretaries. He's been very seasick. Sir Eustace has 2 secretaries with him, and the sea has made them both ill. This man's name is Paget."
So, Sir Eustace Pedler, the owner of the mill house, was on board.
"That's Sir Eustace," the purser continued, "sitting next to the captain."
The more I studied Paget's smooth, bloodless face, the less I liked it. With those secretive eyes and that strangely flat head, it all gave me an unpleasant and alarming feeling. Later on, when I went down to my cabin to see if my removal was in progress, I found my steward busy working at it.
"Very nice cabin, miss. On D-deck. Number 13.
"Oh, no!" I cried. "Not number 13. Number 13 is my one superstition. Almost in tears, I asked the steward, "Is there any other cabin I can have?"
"Well, there is number 17. It was given to someone, but his bags are not in yet, so I'm sure he won't mind."
He left to speak to the purser and returned smiling.
"That's all right, miss."
Number 17 was not quite as large as number 13, but I was very satisfied. At that moment, the man with the cruel face appeared.
"Excuse me," he said, "but this is Sir Eustace Pedler's cabin."
"We have given Sir Eustace number 13, explained the steward.
"No, he is to have number 17. Number 13 is a better cabin, sir. Larger." I must tell you that Sir Eustace has chosen number 17 as being suitable for his needs, and the purser said I could have it."
"I'm sorry," I said coldly, "but number 17 has been given to me."
"I cannot agree to that," Mr. Paget replied. "Steward, put my things in here," demanded a new voice. "This is my cabin."
It was my neighbour at lunch, the Reverend Edward Chichester. "This is my cabin," I said.
"It is Sir Eustace Pedler's cabin,"
said Mr. Paget. We were all getting rather angry.
"I am sorry to have to argue," said Chichester with a smile that did not hide his determination to get what he wanted. "You are going to have number 28, said the steward. "A very good cabin, sir." "I insist. Number 17 was promised to me."
I was not giving in. I disliked Chichester. He had false teeth that made a noise when he ate. Many men have been hated for less. We all said the same things again and again, and none of us would give in. However, there are no people in the world who are as nice to women as sailors. My friend the purser marched in and told everyone that number 17 was my cabin. What a hero! This victory made me feel much better. The sea was smooth, the weather was getting warmer. My seasickness was gone. I went up and enjoyed the deck sports with some pleasant young men who were extremely nice to me. Tea was served, and I ate hungrily. Life was delightful. Dinner was announced, and as I hurried to cabin 17, I wondered what made so many people anxious to get it. And suddenly I thought of that number on the piece of paper I had found. 17-1-22. I had thought it was the date the Kilmorden Castle sailed from Southampton. What if I was wrong? Perhaps 17 meant cabin 17, and 1, the time, 1 o'clock. Then 22 must be the date. Tomorrow was the 22nd.